Good evening, welcome. We'll give it just a couple minutes. You guys are our early people, so we appreciate you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being early. We're going to give it just a few minutes and let people hop on. Oh, and I see some names. Shout out to Stephanie and Eric. Welcome. I see Catherine. I see Candy. I see Rebecca. I see Sharon. Oh, lots of great. Jesse, thank you guys. I appreciate everybody who's coming to in for a real treat and get some great information. So thanks for joining us. We're going to give it a couple more minutes. We're going to pack a lot into an hour tonight. So welcome, welcome. For those of you who aren't our usual attendees, you are welcome to use the chat. You can use the Q&A. As Ernie is presenting tonight, I'll be looking for questions and then we'll take Q&A at the end. It's nice to see some familiar names. Welcome. And while we're waiting, if you guys don't mind, why don't you in the chat put what city you are calling in from tonight, just so we can see who's represented. Ernie's actually familiar with our area, so these might be cities he recognizes.
Yeah, I see some neighbors here.
Yeah, that's great. So welcome, welcome. And Eric, it looks like you're having some problems with your computer, but you should be able to see myself and Ernie on your display. So you need to check it on your side. Okay, then everything is good. We haven't put the PowerPoint up. So you are set. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. It's actually 6:30. We're going to give it just a minute more, but we are so happy you joined us tonight for this very important presentation. We will be recording. For those of you who attended or who signed up for the presentation, we will be sending out a copy of the video as well as the PowerPoint, both in English and Spanish. So we'll have that resource material probably tomorrow, possibly Thursday for you, but we'll get it out. All right, it is 6:31. I'm one of those people who are right on time. So I'm sure we'll have more people hopping on, but until then, so good evening. I'm so happy to be here tonight with you all. I'm excited about this special presentation. Tonight we have Ernie Cruz, and I'm going to read his actual title. He's the Deputy Director of the Community Service Division at Department of Developmental Services. Did I get it right?
Yep.
Yay, good. So, I am very happy to say that I've had the privilege to work alongside Ernie on a number of task force, and I'm especially excited tonight. I was one of the probably hundreds of people that were part of the IPP work groups when DDS was looking at this, and it was 2 years. Was it 2 years of work? Maybe more?
Yep. Yeah.
Numerous work groups. I was one of just a few hundred people who were able to give our input on this. And I just really commend Department of Developmental Services that this was an opportunity for us to make a transformative change in our regional center system, because this was meant as a document that really was person-centered, and that it talked about your strengths, but it also talked about the unmet needs. Because one of the things as advocates we talk about is, where are we capturing the families that aren't getting services? And this document has the capability of doing that. I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Beth Burt. For those of you who are new to the Autism Society or just joining us, I'm the executive director. Tonight, we have Liliana Alvarado, who is translating in Spanish. So if you need Spanish translation, make sure you click on the interpretation button. For those of you who want English, make sure you click on the world button at the bottom and pick the English channel. That way you can hear if somebody who's speaking Spanish has a question, it'll be translated and you'd be able to hear what they're saying. All right, I think I made all my announcements, but I'm really excited. Ernie, thank you again so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about this presentation and to hear what you have to say. So thank you.
No, thank you, Beth. If okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. So, well, again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come and present to you today about the new standardized individual program plan. As Beth mentioned, I'm with the Department of Developmental Services, and I first want to thank Beth for inviting me here today to share with you about the new IPP, individual program plan. And please excuse me if I use the acronym throughout the presentation, but I think IPP is pretty well known. As Beth mentioned, the department has been working for quite some time on the IPP, and we're really excited that this new format has officially launched as of January 1st. There was a lot of work that went in starting back in 2022, and coming to a standardized IPP really started as a performance measure for the regional centers. And I really think that based on the work that was done and the large amount of feedback that we got from the community, it became law. It became a requirement for all 21 regional centers to have a standardized IPP. So the fact that we were able to work with so many people, families, self-advocates, community-based organizations, the regional centers, I think was really a testament to the work that was done and to getting to the point that we're at today. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Throughout the presentation, I am going to put some links in the chat just for reference, so that you have some resources that you can look up. So what I've put right now in the chat is the dedicated web page on the DDS website that has all the IPP materials. It has previous trainings that we've provided and documents that you can reference. There's also videos and guides, and I'll go more into that as I go through the presentation. So, just the agenda for today. Here's what we have that I'll be going over. I want to briefly go over the changes to the IPP and go over the new format. I also want to review the implementation of the IPP as well as the resources that are available to all. And then, we'll finish off with some closing comments and open it up to questions at the end. So starting off with an overview of the IPP. And the changes to the IPP, here you have a slide that talks about what's new, what's the same. With the new IPP, you can expect some of the parts to be different than before. Some of the key highlights include a real emphasis on person-centered approaches and the ability to offer more flexibility in what an individual includes in their individual program plan, in their IPP. This includes things like focusing on strengths and links to personal preference with regards to goals and outcomes. Additionally, this is a statewide implementation, so all regional centers will be using the same plan, the same format. There are some areas and prompts that are new. And also it's important to, in developing the IPP, ensure that it meets not only the state standards, but federal standards, particularly with regards to Medicaid waiver eligibility and how that gets addressed in the IPP. To get to this point, some significant investments have been made with regards to person-centered training, both with regional centers having trainers and those trainers then training their staff or the service coordinators on person-centered practices. Despite the changes in the format, the principles and requirements of the IPP have not changed. There's still statute and requirements of the IPP. The regional centers have a role in the IPP and assessments of needs and services, and the documentation that is needed for information sharing. So what is included in the standardized IPP? Again, I'm going to put some links in the chat just for reference purposes. So including the templates for so you can see if you haven't already seen it. We're going to take some time today to describe what the new IPP format includes and what you can expect to see in the standardized IPP. This format has been developed with recommendations and input from many community partners. We're also going to have an opportunity to provide information as we're going along about the different sections in the IPP. And I'm going to spend some time on this slide just because the intent is to go over the layout of the IPP, starting with the introduction of the individual. And really, the introduction is intended to provide a positive introduction of the individual. And in this section, this is where you would share the important things that you want someone to know about, the individual, your child, what people like and admire about the individual, and what the individual, the child is most proud of in their life. The next section after the introduction is how the plan was developed. And this section records things such as where the meeting happened, the way an individual chose to participate in the plan, and who else helped with developing the IPP. This is all about the planning meeting. Where did the meeting take place? Who was at the meeting? How did everyone participate in the meeting? In planning for the IPP meeting, it's important to consider preferences and needs of the individual and their circle of support. IPP meetings should be conducted in a place and at a time that is comfortable for the individual. The IPP should be an opportunity for the individual to decide who provides input into the plan and what type of information is provided. And for young children or individuals who may have difficulty sitting through a long meeting, how the planning team captured the wants, needs, and preferences should all be captured here. The next section is related to vision for the future. And here is where it's identified what the short and long-term vision a person has. This is where you would share information about short and long-term goals. Short-term meaning something that the individual wants to happen soon, like in a year or less. Long-term means something in the future, like beyond 2 years. The section offers an opportunity to lift voices of the individual and their circle of support in sharing their short and long-term goals. The section might focus on one area of an individual's life where they want to see changes or have goals. It may also include objectives for those individuals or those who whose caregivers are aging and how to plan for the future. Aging and succession planning has really gotten a lot of attention over the last year and is actually something that is now in statute that needs to be discussed on a regular basis, on an annual basis. So in this section, think about those short-term and long-term visions. The next part of the IPP, the next section, is about communication. And as you know, communication is a critical piece in all of our lives, and absolutely critical and required piece to include in the IPP. You want people to understand you want people to understand the individual. This is where you share how the individual communicates, what is the best way to communicate with the individual, what do others need to know to be able to communicate with the individual. This would be a place to identify if there are supports or devices that the individual needs or uses to communicate, and how the individual shows that they understand. Think about what other important information would be important to share here in this communication section. The conversation will likely involve others in the individual support network. And like any of us, it's often the people who know best, who know us, know the individual best and know what a certain look or tone of voice means that others may not be aware of. The next section is related to decision making, and the decision making section of the IPP offers flexibility in recording life areas that a person has support in making decisions and who they receive support from. This section also allows for individuals to choose one or more life areas. And when I get into the life areas, I'll explain a little bit more there. But really, what decisions does a person make for themselves? For parents, what decisions do you make for your child? What decisions does your child make? Will your child need an advocate in the future? Is there anyone else involved in the decision making? Could you benefit from support from others in making decisions? Could they be made on your own? So these are some of the things to think about and to include in this decision-making section. Life areas is the next part of the IPP, and it's really a flexible section of the IPP that talks about a person's goals or how they would like to meet those. And like I said earlier, I'm going to spend in the next few slides, I'm going to talk more about life areas. and walking you through those different areas. And then the final section of the IPP format is emergency planning. And, you know, everyone may experience an emergency in their life, but having a plan in place will help the individual know what to do, not just the individual, but people that support the individual. You know, things to think about is, do you have an emergency plan for your child? What are the steps needed to keep your child healthy and safe during an emergency? Who should be contacted when there's an emergency? And what important things do people need to know and do to support an individual during an emergency? Again, the purpose of this section of the IPP is to describe the risk in an individual's life that may lead to an emergency, and that the individual and planning team agree are specific emergency plan that's appropriate. And in this area, in each of the areas, you'll see different prompts. For this area, some of the prompts are, what is the emergency preparedness plan for the individual? Who should be contacted? And just important things to know to do to support the person in an emergency. So these are the main components of the IPP. I know it was a lot of information, particularly for this slide, but it's thorough and it covers all the different parts of an individual's life through, in addition to the life areas, and helps them create a plan that is centered on the person. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about life areas. So what are life areas? Life areas are a very important part of the new IPP. And I'm going to go through these. Life areas are used as a way to talk about goals and supports needed to meet those goals. They are also used to address a desired outcome or goal for the most important parts of an individual's life. This format offers areas that can be flexible in reflecting the outcomes and services that an individual would like to highlight in their IPP. Life areas may be selected based off a person's preference, their outcomes, and services and supports. Individuals will need to choose at least one life area to include in the IPP, and should select life areas that support the outcomes desired and the services that the person is receiving. Funded services need to be tied to a life area. And, you know, in the life areas, and you could have one life area, you know, you could have 5 life areas, even more than that. In this area, there are 4 prompting questions, and they include, you know, what is currently happening, what is important to the individual, what is important for the individual, and what needs to be done to meet the goals. And so these are the different life areas. There are 12 life areas that an individual may choose to include in their IPP. And it really, you know, as I mentioned before, the life areas are flexible, are intended to be flexible. As you can see in the slide, there are many different options and areas that an individual can focus on and create goals for. One of the, in the process of developing the new IPP, one of the frequent questions we got was, why isn't there an other category? And, you know, other can get very broad. So we felt that with these 12, they were general enough that you could capture different areas of a person's life. And they were, you know, they weren't developed to be broad enough that they could capture different goals and outcomes. I think an example that came up quite frequently was, for example, social rec. Social rec may fall into a different life area depending on the individual. Social rec could fall in the life area of community participation for one individual, but for another individual, it could fall in the personal and emotional growth, or in the relationships. So it really depends, and it's something that would be discussed by the IPP team during the meeting. I'm next going to go into the agreement and signature page. And this is one of the last things that you'll do for the IPP is to review and complete the agreement and signature page. This form is part of the IPP, but distinct from the person-centered part of the IPP and must be completed as part of the IPP meeting. And the reason for having this IPP agreement and signature form is that community members and advocates strongly expressed that they did not want to have really the administrative information that is included in the agreement form being part of the IPP, where you're talking about life areas, vision for the future. They didn't want it to become this document, you know, I think some of the feedback we heard, we don't want tables as part of the IPP. We don't want that administrative component to it. You know, we want that separate. This agreement form, it was still required because we needed to meet certain statutory requirements and capture certain information, either that's required in regulations or statute. So just to go briefly through the agreement and signature form, it includes identifying information. It includes information about services and supports. This is where agreed upon services would be captured. It includes space to capture regional center funded services, as well as services funded by generic agencies. It'll discuss outcomes for, you know, the different services. It also will capture if there's agreement on all services. So this section is used to document if the individual or the parent legal representative agrees with the services and supports. And there's two options. Either there's agreement on the services or there's a disagreement or denial on services. And again, we received a lot of feedback from families and stakeholders that it needed to be very clear. There's either agreement or there's a disagreement, and that needs to be captured. Some additional requests: if there is disagreement or a denial on services is selected as part of the check boxes on this document, then, you know, what are those other options that individuals and families have? You know, they can either select to have another IPP meeting within 15 days or later to have another discussion on the services that there still may be some additional conversations that need to be had, or they can request a notice of action in their preferred language and in a format that the individual or family chooses, you know, whether it's via email, certified mail, or fax. You'll also see a section on exceptions to settings requirements. And this is really related to the home and community-based services waiver. If a modification is required to any home and community-based services setting requirement, it's necessary to capture that. And it'll be indicated here in the agreement and signature form, showing that the IPP team is in agreement. There's also an acknowledgement section, and this section of the agreement form verifies that the service coordinator has provided all the required information to the individual and their family, if applicable, at the time of the IPP meeting. And this includes, as part of these acknowledgements, getting a copy of all the services and supports the individual received the previous year, talking about any needs the individual has right now or in the future, the date of the next IPP, how the individual would like to receive a copy of their IPP, and also talking about some topics that are either required in statute or regulation, such as discussing self-direction, how to do an appeal, talking about employment and transportation, and succession planning, which I mentioned earlier, making sure that that has been discussed. Obviously, some of these topics will not be applicable to individuals who are under the age of 18. There's also an additional notes section, and here is space to capture any additional information related to follow-up activities or any other information that would be important to memorialize either at the request of the individual or family. And there's also the signature area, where a signature from the individual, parent, or legal representative is necessary for services to begin. The individual or legal guardian will likely, depending on how the IPP meeting is held, they may choose to sign at the end of the IPP meeting, or they may choose to sign once they have the IPP. The ultimate functionality with this form is, whether somebody can sign electronically or they prefer in paper, to have those options available. And as many signatures as needed can be added to this section of the agreement form. Lastly, on this form, you'll see an optional survey. And this is a new addition to the IPP, and really something that was important to, all groups, getting that feedback about how that IPP went. As I mentioned, this is a voluntary and anonymous survey that can be completed by the individual or family after the IPP meeting. There's a QR code that will be shared during the meeting. There's also a phone number and email address where, if for whatever reason they're having difficulty, they can contact the Department of Developmental Services for more information, or to request to receive a paper version of the survey mailed to them. The responses to this survey come straight to the department. So, we often get that question, oh, is this going to go to the regional center? Is this going to go to the service coordinator? This is set up for the responses to come straight to DDS. And it really gives the department the opportunity to see if any regional centers need some additional technical assistance based on the responses that are coming in regarding the implementation of the new standardized IPP. The questions, we tried to keep to a minimal number of questions. They'll include which regional center are you or your family member with? Did your service coordinator listen to what is important to you and your family and use that information to help create a plan to meet your goals? Were you satisfied with the service providers the regional center had available for you to choose between? Did your regional center provide you and your family with information about self-direction, including self-determination and participant-directed services, and using traditional provider services? There's a drop-down option allowing the person to choose the phrase that best describes the information that the regional center provided. And lastly, did your service coordinator treat you with respect during your IPP meeting? So again, optional, anonymous, but this is going to go a long way to tell us, how implementation of the new IPP is going. Let me go to the next slide. Next, I'm going to go over implementation and resources. I'll go over how we are implementing the new IPP as well as resources for the community. So with regards to regional center implementation, as I mentioned, starting back in 2022, we had what was known as a Regional Center Performance Measures Work Group that Beth has been a regular participant in. And you really have to build a foundation. And one of those foundational items was regional centers having at least one certified person-centered thinking facilitation trainer. This was an area of focus for the Regional Center Performance Measures Work Group, and a measure was established in that area. The purpose of having this trainer was to teach service coordinators person-centered practices and to train staff on how to use a new IPP that would be person-centered. This ensures that everyone involved knows what the expectations are and that they have the necessary skills to focus on developing an IPP that is person-centered. There have also been updates to the client case management record systems that the regional centers use. So this new format is available, became available to all regional centers in January as part of their case management system. The department is providing regional centers also with the IPP format in multiple languages so that they have that available as well. We also have the languages that are currently available on our website. We've also been providing technical assistance to regional centers. Obviously, with something so big as a standardized IPP, it was essential that we provide training to the regional centers. So starting in September of last year, we did 3 training sessions for all 21 regional centers. We also, in putting together the template and the agreement form, we knew that it was essential for regional center staff or service coordinators that they have some sort of instructional guide. It's a new format, new sections, something that they can go back and refer to. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. This is all available on the dedicated web page, but this is the guide that was specifically created for the regional centers. It's a detailed document that provides information for service coordinators to complete the IPP in a person-centered way and using the new format. It includes information about what is required in an IPP and things to think about and questions to ask throughout the IPP process. I think one of the big things that we tried to get across in the training, for instance, was the importance of acknowledging somebody's culture. We use different icons and things throughout the guide to really put attention on that. We, with all that has happened over the last 6 months and going into implementation and some of the questions that we're getting, we're also working on putting together a frequently asked questions document that will be posted on our website. And of course, with a rollout so huge, we've been providing ongoing technical assistance to the regional centers in 2025, where we have an opportunity for regional centers to provide questions and discuss scenarios. And we also have a dedicated email address for both regional centers and for the community to ask questions. Let me see if I can put that in the chat. It's here it is, IPP support at dds.gov. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So, the process is ongoing. Next slide. resources for the community. So talked about all the resources, the training that was done for the regional centers. We also knew that it was going to be important to put out some resources and guides for the community. The dedicated web page obviously has, it has previous trainings, it has correspondence that we've put out, but it also has resources that include guides, which were developed as interactive tools to help think about goals, strengths, and successes. These guides include, they're called Your Plan. So Your Plan is for self-advocates and adults. Then we said, well, we really need a Your Plan for families. So we have Your Child's Plan, which is for families with children ages 3 to 13. And your youth's plan, which is for young adults ages 14 to 22 and their families. These are already posted. We're still working on additional languages. And as we get those additional languages translated, you'll see additional versions posted on our website. We also thought it would be important to have some videos. And so there are also videos which serve as additional ways to learn about person-centered practices and the IPP. One is an interview style series about using person-centered practices to develop an IPP. These videos support an individual or family to start thinking about life goals, desires, and supports. And the other, still not posted, but in the process, is going to be an animated series that explains the IPP and what needs to be done to prepare. So these are what the different guides look like. There's a dedicated tab for these Your Plans on our website. Here you'll see the covers for each of the different guides. We've created 3 of them that captures each of the major life stages, and really excited about these. We strongly encourage individuals and families. We all have busy lives, totally understand, but as much as possible to get acquainted with the guides, particularly prior to the IPP meeting. These guides were developed and intended to help foster thoughts and ideas that can be discussed during the meeting. An IPP meeting, there's, preparing before the IPP meeting, what happens during the IPP meeting, and then what to think about after the IPP meeting. So, with regards to questions and closing comments, just wanted to share, some of the answers to the common questions that we've been receiving. After months of training and pilot testing of the IPP, we've compiled answers to some of the most common questions we receive. The IPP, the new IPP, the rollout was required by statute as of January 1st, 2025. And so any new IPPs after January 1st are required to be done in the new format. We've also received questions about how do regional centers know what the procedures are. The procedures have been given to the regional centers. I shared with you the guide that was created just for the regional center so that it helps them navigate the meeting in a person-centered way. Another common question has been whether the IPP, your current IPP, will change right away. The answer to that is no. This is going to be a process. So, for instance, if your regional center does IPPs every 3 years, you would have a current IPP in your current format. It wouldn't change to the new format until your next IPP. And, each regional center, there's going to be regional centers that do annual IPPs and some that do them every 2 years, and some that do them every 3 years. So it really depends on, when your next IPP is held. Can I invite other people to my IPP meeting? The answer to that is yes. You don't have to be in the IPP meeting alone, and the guides are resourced, to help prepare for the IPP. We've also received questions from individuals in self-determination wanting to know if the new IPP replaces their person-centered plan. And the new IPP, this IPP format is person-centered, but it does not replace established person-centered plans. Lastly, using the guides is not necessary, but just to reemphasize, they were developed to help prepare for that IPP meeting, both before, during, and after. And we're actually going to pull within those guides, there are worksheets to help you think about things to ask and things you want to discuss. So we're working on pulling out the worksheet sections so that it's not overwhelming for a family or an individual to go through the whole guide. Maybe they're looking for something in particular, make that process easier for them as well. This next slide is just a summary of all the different resources that are available. The videos, you can see the different trainings and meetings that we've had on our websites, the 3 guides, resources which are for the regional centers, including the instructions, templates, and guides. We have sample Word versions of the templates that you can refer to. And then we're working on getting posted the frequently asked questions. And again, that's in the link to the dedicated web page. So that concludes what I wanted to present today. Again, thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you and present on this. Here I also have the dedicated email address if you have questions, as well as some links. I'll be in communication with Beth as far as providing this PowerPoint. And at this point, I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Ernie. That was a lot of great information. And yes, we have questions. This is the exciting part of the night, right? It's not too bad, not too bad at all. And actually your FAQ at the end answered some of our questions. So you guys did a great job on that. With regards to the IPP form, is that the one that is used in the IPP interview? So that we've had a couple of people who said, I want to see the actual form. And you'd given us the Word document. So the Word document is, because this is all in template in the computer, right? That the caseworker looks at. So the Word document you gave us is the template that they'll have in their drop-down menus and all of that good stuff. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, Beth. And, all 21 regional centers use a system called Sandus, but there's some regional centers that may have like a separate application on top of Sandus. Regardless of what system they use, they have to follow this format that's presented in the Word version.
Perfect. And I have to say, I learned something because I did not know that some regional centers had triannual IPPs or every 2 years. I always thought annual was the max. So this person asked, is there a difference between the use of forms if they're on a triannual IPP, but they have an annual review? So will the annual review use this format, or is it only the triannual IPP that will use this format?
Good question. Yeah, what the department was tasked with doing in statute was strictly the IPP format. So in a case of an annual review, the regional center would have their own annual review type document. And so unless it's, a new IPP meeting, that's when they would have to switch to the new format.
And that brings us up to another question. So somebody had their IPP last Tuesday, and this new format wasn't used. So people are wondering, there was somebody else who said they had one in the fall of last year. People are excited. So they're like, I want to be on this format. What would they need to do to request that?
Yeah, obviously, I think one of the early questions we had was, oh, okay, January 1st, my IPP will change. And we're like, no, it's how many people are served in the system to be able to switch all IPPs at one time. So it was based on the cycle. Um, I would recommend reaching out to the service coordinator and requesting a new IPP meeting, and asking, by having a new IPP meeting, they would have to use the new format.
Right. Someone else asked, what about individuals who are over 22? Does this new IPP support these individuals too? So I saw that you had I forgot the name of the plan for self-advocates and clients. I didn't see one specifically for parents of adults who may need extra guidance or complex needs. Are you planning on a guide for that?
The Your Plan guide, which is for individuals and self-advocates, also, I would also reference that guide if you have an adult child and you're helping with the IPP meeting. It provides all the information to prepare for that IPP meeting as well. So the one titled Your Plan would be the one to use.
Okay, perfect. And then if they still have questions after the presentation, where can they direct their questions? Would that be that IPP support at dds.ca.gov?
Correct. Yes.
If we say it 3 times, I think it's like a commercial, right?
It'll stay. Yeah.
Um, I'm looking. Oh, this question, is this available in Braille?
Not yet. Um, we've talked about Braille, and ASL as well. So I'll have to follow up on that, Beth.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking. Any other questions? This is your time. Let's see if we got anything else. Oh, is this available in plain language?
In developing it, both the template, the IPP, the new template, the agreement form, the guide for regional centers, and particularly the guides Your Plan, that's what we strove for in that development. And so, part of it was putting it together, but then having a variety of different people review it, different community-based organizations. And I think one of the consistent feedback was, why don't you use this language or this word instead of that? So I would say that we develop these with that purpose, and then the feedback and review process re-emphasize that, and we try to make it as plain language as possible.
I was on some of those calls and they were excruciating sometimes, but I appreciate the patience of between one word and another word to make sure that the intent was very clear. What about services that have to be authorized every 6 months? Do you need a new IPP form?
No, that would be captured in the IPP and in the IPP agreement and signature form, sometimes services, a regional center will have a service that needs to be re-reviewed on a certain cadence. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do a whole new IPP.
And this asks, will the template also be in Spanish?
Yes. We're aiming for to get to 11 total languages.
So let's talk about, I'm going to talk about this general. We got a couple of questions regarding unmet needs. And can you talk about how this IPP, when there's a family or an adult who feels like they need resources and they're not getting those resources, how does this IPP help that process?
Yeah, no, really the IPP is intended to have that discussion to meet those needs. So if there's an impasse with regards to a needed service, is it going to an appeal? Is it, having a follow-up meeting? Those are things that, for us, the other big piece with rolling out a standardized IPP is really having more data available to us. So, if there is a disagreement or a denial or some sort of information being provided that the service isn't available, then what are really reviewing what the appeal procedures are, how what steps can be taken to get that service. And there's potentially the additional notes section that I talked about in the agreement and signature page could be used by anybody in the IPP team to document if there's something missing. But really, every effort should be made to try and resolve what that need is. And I think with having the agreement form and covering what the options are, that should give the individual or family that information.
And I'm going to put my advocate hat on and really ask families to have that information be put in the unmet needs section, because that's how we are going to capture, let's say, for instance, behavioral respite, but there's no providers. So it looks like it's authorized, but the family's needs aren't being met. So we need to put that in there so people can understand what the actual need of that person is that is not or getting met. So I'm just trying to answer all the questions. And if you are having problems with your caseworker or you don't feel like you're getting the answers, you can also ask for the program manager. Don't be afraid to go to that next level and ask some other questions. There's not going to be retribution. And I know that's something that our families are afraid of, but it's really important to ask the questions, because otherwise things don't change. The IPP, that is correct. So if it's only the IPPs that are being standardized, not the, if there's a regional center that has intervals, like annual check-ins are not being standardized. And Lisa, you need to type, if possible, your questions. We don't unmute people on our webinars. So let me check. Oh, here's a good question. How do you intertwine self-determination program within the IPP? So how does that interact?
The IPP, people have asked, oh, is there a different IPP for self-determination? And no, it's an IPP for anybody served in the system. And so, you know, you would capture, like with any other individual, what are the different, you know, all the areas that we reviewed, the introduction, the vision for the future, and the life areas. And you know, with regards to those life areas, you know, that we've received questions about, well, who would be the, you know, who would be the service provider for different services? And, you know, that's something that would be discussed with the service coordinator. It could be the FMS agency that's identified. And, you know, the reference is made to the budget, you know, for self-determination, but really there's not a different IPP format because somebody's in self-determination.
I'm going to say this is going to be our last question. What about aggressive behaviors or crises that are not addressed at the time of need, like after hour care? So to me, that would be an unmet need.
Yeah, and you know, if it was discussed during the meeting and there either wasn't a solution or there needs to be, you know, additional follow-up, again, is it something that needs to be appealed? You know, is it something that needs to be captured in a life area? And you know, a follow-up meeting needs to occur. You know, and like you mentioned, Beth, is it something that needs to be captured in the additional notes?
Yeah. We've got to keep capturing that unmet need so we can capture the data, and that helps when they do requests for proposals or trying to provide new services. All right, I know we've got more questions coming in, but I promised Ernie an hour, so I'm going to keep to my word. I appreciate everybody who joined us tonight. Again, if you have additional questions, it's ippsupport@dds.ca.gov. I will be sending the video, the presentation, and the links that Ernie gave to us, and just hope that you found this helpful as we walk through this process. And a huge thank you again to Ernie for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time. And then to Miss Liliana for interpreting tonight. And thank you all for joining us. So have a great evening and take care, everybody.
Thanks, Beth.
Bye.